Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts Alex and Sean. On this episode, we have the enigmas that are known as the Chicago Bulls and the Chicago Blackhawks. We also will talk about the Chicago Cubs fan convention, which was this weekend.
Yeah, that was fun.
And we will also talk about the ever so important number 3 overall pick that the Chicago Bears have. All of this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. But first, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. And I recently went to the Wolves Ice Hogs game in Rosemont because my daughter she was screaming hockey, hockey, hockey when I got home. She's 2. And so we're like, all right, well, we're 10 minutes from there. So we drive up there, get tickets, and go in. And it was fun, but it's so much more fun going to the games in Rockford. The BMO Harris Bank Center is such a great place for minor league hockey. It's so much fun. It's so much more inviting than going to Wolves games. Do yourself a favor. Check it out. Tickets starting under $10. It's only 90 minutes from the city limits. Head on over to icehogs.com. Get yourself a jersey, some tickets, a hat, shirt, and more. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. So, Alex, lots of weirdness going on in Chicago sports, but yesterday or this morning, I was on Twitter and I saw this article and I was reading through it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to save this and talk about this with Alex. And it was an article about sabermetrics of who should be the leadoff hitter for the Chicago Cubs. And then later on, I saw you retweeted it and saying, I wrote this article. I was like,
I did write that article.
I was like, okay, well, then we can still discuss it, but you probably already know more about it than I do because you wrote it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was funny because I was like, oh, I'm totally going to bring this up with Alex. And then I saw you retweeted it and I was like, I didn't even look who wrote that. I'm like, I just saved it on my browser window so I could talk about it later.
So Alex, we have some Bulls, some Blackhawks, a little bit of Cubs, and Chicago Bears to talk. Your choice. What would you like to start with, my friend?
Well, you know what? I really, really enjoyed watching what I could of the Cubs convention. You know, I wasn't there, but I saw the coverage of the beginning of the game, or not the game, the convention, I should say. I wish it was a game. And saw kind of the concluding ceremonies and a lot of stuff on Twitter. So I guess we could start with the Cubs because I really have missed talking baseball a lot.
Oh, yeah, I love baseball. So, yeah, I only caught bits and pieces of it. It's been a hectic weekend, so I have only caught bits and pieces of it. All I really saw was Joe Madden getting a little feisty about the questioning of his World Series managing.
Yes.
Which means for a guy that has talked about how he likes to, banter back and forth with his buddies at the bar, means it's striking a nerve a little bit.
Right. I think it's very, very appropriate at times to bring up stuff like that. A big managerial mistake can be noticed by a lot. And I'll be completely honest, I didn't think he made the best choices in Game 6 and 7, but they won. At the end of the day, they won the World Series. And I think it's one of those things where people should just say, they won, no matter what happened, they won. So there's no point of bringing it up anymore because, they won. I don't think there's much reason to bring it up. People brought up like the Cubs falling apart in '03 over and over, and that was they lost. They had the lead and they lost. This game we had the lead, but we came back and won. So I understand his frustration.
Yeah, I mean, to a point. It's, for me, I guess he absolutely made mistakes. And I know he said, well, I went and said that we were going to manage differently in the World Series. I get that, but that doesn't mean he did the right things. Like bringing in Lester in a dirty inning, taking Hendricks out when he did, the number of pitches that he let Aroldis do in those last couple games. Like there's a lot of things, and I'm not gonna be, beat him up because he got us the thing that we've been trying to get as Cubs fans our whole lives. So I can't be mad at him for that, but he did make mistakes and he's not owning up to it, and which is a very un-Joe Madden like thing to do. You would think that he'd be like, you know what, I wasn't perfect, I made mistakes, let's go move on. I think if he would have done that, people would have just been like, okay, but he's pretending like that everything he did was right because it worked out. And sometimes things work out when you do the wrong things.
Sure.
So it's one of those things that I'm really happy of the result, but the last few steps to get it were a little shaky.
Right. I mean, I know what you mean, and that's a really good point, because he never really said, look, I kind of made a mistake there, or he said, maybe could have gone another way. He defended his approach to the game, his approach to the series pretty much entirely. He never really suggested that he may have done it another way. And, it's easy to look at that two ways as well, because, it is uncharacteristic of him, because usually in the past, if something didn't go right, he said, well, maybe we could have done this, or maybe this could have happened, but, let's move on. But, I also got to give him credit for at least sticking to what he thought was right. And maybe a lot of us didn't think it was right, maybe analysts didn't think it was right, and maybe it wasn't right overall, just in the scheme of things, but he did stick up for his managerial strategies. So, it's there's so many ways you can kind of look at it, but I think you could just kind of cloud that all together, and one thing is, we won. So, but it's interesting to talk about, considering, could you imagine what would have happened to Joe Madden if the Cubs would have lost that game? Could you imagine, like, the hot seat takes that some people would have been bringing up? I mean, it could have been really, really ugly. Look what happened to Dusty Baker after his questionable managerial questionable managerial strategy.
Oh yeah, and I have White Sox fans that are more of a Cub haters than White Sox fans, but they still like, remember in Dusty we trusty. How did that work out? And you know what? I was cursing Joe Madden out during that rain delay. I'm
so
going to
was
fully
I.
admit it.
So was I.
And I invented new swear words, and it was it would have been really ugly. It would have been, this whole off season would have been, I think any hope the Cubs would have had of building some sort of dynasty would have been really shaky grounds, because more so because the fans feeding, their nervous energy feeding onto the players. Before the last home game for the Cubs in the World Series, Rizzo was talking about how stiff they were because he could feel the nervous energy of the crowd, and he's like, it just didn't feel right. It felt weird, and I was feeding off of their nervousness, and made me nervous. And you would have a whole season full of that. And you'd have a lot of people that, instead of giving you the benefit of the doubt, and when you have old crazy Uncle Joe bringing circus animals and magicians to the clubhouse, instead of being, oh, that's funny, ha ha ha, they would probably be What's he doing? He needs to manage better.
Right.
That's stupid. And it would have gotten out of control based on people bringing historical, precedents into the current situation. And I'm glad it didn't go that way, because now people can breathe a sigh of relief. And if we don't win it next year, people aren't going to jump off ledges. They've got it. They've got their baby already. And if they don't get another baby, we're content for a few more years.
Absolutely. And you know what's funny is actually before the postseason started last year, before the regular season was over, I actually saw takes from people suggesting that Madden should be fired if they didn't win the World Series this year. And you're thinking, if there were people saying that before they even started postseason play, just imagine what would have happened if they would have lost. And the irony of it all is, if you look back at Dusty Baker and you look at Joe Madden and you look at the way things were handled, like when things were going wrong for the Cubs, it was almost the exact opposite, because Dusty Baker was known for leaving the guys like Pryor and Wood in there way too long when they should have been taken out. And Joe Madden is the exact opposite by pulling guys when one little thing went wrong and kind of panicking, and then switching back to Dusty Baker by leaving in Chapman too long. So it's almost like it started from one spectrum, went to the opposite spectrum, then went back to a Dusty Baker-like spectrum, except this time it was with relievers and not starters like Dusty Baker.
And I can see a little bit of what he's doing, because you don't want to burn a guy out with too many innings and not have anything in the tank for next year. Somewhat, but that's not what he was doing. And with Chapman, they don't care if his arm falls off. They knew they weren't going to re-sign him. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even put an offer in on him. But they knew they weren't going to re-sign Chapman. They didn't care.
He was purely a rental.
Yeah, he was a rental, and they were going to they got the insurance on him, and they were just going to drive him until the engine fell out, and that's what they did. There was nothing left for that man to give, and they were fine with that. But Hendricks, that's a car they just bought, and they've got they've got a lot more miles they need to get out of that car.
Yeah, and that also brings me to another area that we've talked about before with Chapman, and people talking about his legacy in Chicago, and people talking about Gleyber Torres, and people who are kind of upset about losing Gleyber Torres for Aroldis Chapman. And that's kind of another similar area where I think about the whole Joe Madden controversy. I just say, at the end of the day, we won the World Series. Trading anything for that World Series was worth it. And that's why I look at, the starters, the way they pitch. You kind of brought up the don't want to burn out for next season. Well, my kind of argument is, you're not playing for next season. You're in the World Series. You're playing for right now. Worry about next season. Right now is right now, and we're trying to win the World Series. And they won the World Series. So it's the Joe Madden and Chapman are, to me, by far the most quote-unquote controversial figures of that Cubs World Series run, because everyone else Rizzo contributed, Brian contributed, Baez contributed, even Jason Hayward contributed with the speech in the rain delay, and Miguel Montero had that big RBI single to extend the lead, and of course Ben Zobrist got the most important hit of them all. So those two were the most controversial figures in that World Series, even after they won the World Series, whether it was Joe Madden's managing, or the way Chapman carried himself, or the way Chapman pitched after he'd pitched a lot already, giving up the home run to Rajai Davis. So it's kind of interesting right there. And, Chapman's gone, and Joe Madden, I know he doesn't like being asked these questions, but once next season starts, I think that'll all fizzle away, and everyone will just worry about this year, knowing that we won the World Series.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the Gleyber Torres trade, I'm not happy about it, is because I think he, if it wasn't a trade deadline move, think we could have gotten a lot more for him, but it's one of those things is you weigh the risks and the rewards. And in that situation, we knew what we needed to get the World Series title. And look at the Atlanta Braves is what they win 14 titles in a row, and they got one World Series out of that. They won 14 division titles.
Yep.
And so they got one World Series win out of that. And I have a friend that's a Braves fan. He's from Georgia, and you know, he was telling me, he's like, I hope you fare better than we did, because that was pretty much like almost a dynasty had they won a few of those. But
Oh yeah.
the Cubs knew what they needed to do, and they went for Wade Davis first. Wade Davis was, I was reading an interview with Jed Hoyer. He said Wade Davis was option number 1, and the Royals told them that the starting point was Kyle Schwarber. And
Yes.
they said, no thanks. And
No way.
they went somewhere else. So it was Aroldis Chapman. And in the end of the day, the Cubs won the World Series. So it doesn't really matter unless Gleyber Torres becomes Derek Jeter and leads the Yankees to a bunch of World Series. Then it doesn't really matter because the Cubs got that World Series. That was the most important, and that was the one that was right in front of them. Is a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Yeah, and especially a World Series that's been awaited for 108 years. You know, it's not just like, you know, a World Series after you won maybe a decade ago or a little sooner, a little later. This was the World Series everyone has been waiting for. So, you know, you pay a little bigger of a price to get a prize that's priceless. And one thing I think that's interesting to think about is, despite losing Gleyber, the Cubs farm is still pretty good. And, you know, part of me thinks, was Gleyber ever really part of our future plans, considering what position he played and what we have already for a long time in like Baez and Russell and Bryant? But you could also say he could continue to do really good, and you could get something even better in a trade for the long term. But, you know, that's just kind of another way of looking at it. But I think at the end of the day, what's truly important is that they won the World Series. You know, Chapman was interesting because he either looked really good in the postseason or not good. There was never really an in-between. And here's my question for you, Sean. How would you sum up Aroldis Chapman's Cubs career, that half a season and that postseason?
How would I sum that up? I would say infinite talent with a high dose of apathy.
Okay.
Is
Interesting.
He clearly didn't want to be here. He was just waiting for that payday. He wanted to go back to the Yankees. For some reason, he loved it there. And this was, I think he wanted a title, but it's he from the get-go, even from the opening press conference where he was just like, he just didn't care. Like, they were like, oh, you know, Jed and Theo said that they talked to you and everything was kosher. And he's like, no. I mean, it was never on board. He was never on board after the first 4-out save when he came out. I was like, that's not what I want to do. I want 3 outs. I want a clean inning. He just never was fully on board. And to hear stories afterwards how when he left Game 7 of the World Series and he was in tears, I was really shocked because I just figured that this was just a moment in time for him and not something bigger than that.
You know, it's interesting you say that all because, yeah, you know, we kind of know Aroldis Chapman and the Cubs have had some history. There was that whole thing in 2014 with that benches clearing brawl in Cincinnati. I mean, keep in mind, there's only about like 5 or so guys on the roster left from that 2014 team. But, you know, Rizzo, team leader, was heavily involved in that. And, you know, I kind of wondered if he's like, I really don't like the Cubs, but I'm here and I'm trying to win a ring. So, you know, I guess we'll just try to win a ring. And I mean, there were times when it seemed like he enjoyed being here, and there were times where he just didn't seem like he really did. Kind of like what you said about the opening press conference. Like, he just wasn't fully there, wasn't fully invested in being part of the Cubs. Yeah, and so far with his performance, to kind of sum it up, you look at how dominating Aroldis Chapman can be, and there were times he came in and he just threw smoke by the guys and didn't even give him a chance. I mean, look at the save he got in Game 4 of the NLDS. Like, that was just boom, 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 strikeout, strikeout, strikeout. But I felt like there were a lot of times this year when Aroldis Chapman wasn't as dominating as advertised. He labored a lot to get a lot of outs this year. I feel like there were a lot of long at-bats. Guys were fouling off pitches, and I feel like he wasn't as dominant as advertised, but overall, he did get a job done in some crucial parts. Like I said, the NLDS at the end, and in Game 4, and in Game 5 of the World Series. He did get some stuff done, but he did look mortal a lot of the times.
I don't know if this movie's well before your time, but you may have seen it because it's a classic. The Bad News Bears.
Yep.
Aroldis Chapman is our Kelly Leak. He didn't want to be there first. They finally got him on board, and he was super talented. But I just sort of see him as that. It's, he was not fully invested, and he wanted to be somewhere else. But he came in, did what he had to do, and I think he enjoyed it. Being part of the team once the postseason came around. But ultimately, he was just making the best of a situation, and I think there was very little doubt that he was, he was going back to New York.
Yeah, absolutely. I said there was no way that he was coming back. And I mean, most Cubs fans probably felt the same way, because a lot of people on Twitter were saying, all right, Aroldis Chapman's probably not coming back. Who do you think the Cubs will look into? Kenley Jensen, Wade Davis, Mark Melancon, that kind of thing. So, I'm glad we didn't sign for that money. I think trading for Wade Davis was a lot better because you didn't sign and commit to him for 5 years and 80-some million to a guy who's over 30 and relies on his arm speed to get outs, because if that arm wears down ever, he's not going to be effective. I mean, I think there's a little bit of concern in the later years among some Yankees fans about that.
Yeah, my only issue with the Aroldis Chapman trade and the Wade Davis trade is that, not that we got rid of Jorge Soler, who I really do like Jorge Soler, and I think he's going to be a good hitter in this league. Eventually,
if he stays healthy,
it's gonna eventually click for him. But and Gleyber Torres, I knew that the two of them, the only place that they had in the future of this organization was to get to a point where you could trade them for starting pitching. That was the point, and we didn't. We ended up trading them for relievers, and one was a very important reliever, and hopefully the other one is too. But I thought that this would be a 2 chips to get starting pitching.
Right. No, I definitely understand that, because, you look at the future of this Cubs team and you look at the starting pitching, it's all veteran, really, aside from, like, Kyle Hendricks. And, we missed out on Tyson Ross. He went to the Rangers, but you have Arrieta, who's on his arbitration deal last year. John Lester, who's really good, but, he's no spring chicken. But again, his big contract is worth it. We eventually got the World Series with him in his second year, but, he's older. And then you have John Lackey, who's probably just going to be around this year, and that's it. He might even retire after this year. So, there's a lot more question in the future of the starting pitching. That's definitely true.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought the Cubs would have been really smart to go after Quintana or Chris Sale and try to put a package together to try to get one of those guys, because adding another strong lefty into the mix just makes you better. Because I don't think there's any shot of Jake Arrieta being a Chicago Cub for 2018.
I don't think so either.
I don't think he really wants to be here anymore. He's not going to the White House. And he feels that he deserves a lot more money and the Cubs in a lot more years, and the Cubs just, they're not willing to do a 7-year deal for a pitcher that's this old.
Right, and someone who was still good last year, but wasn't the same as he was in 14 and 15. So, when it comes to the package for Quintana and Sale, I think they wanted an absolute king's ransom from the Cubs for that, and it's hard to say if I'd be willing to give all that up, considering the circumstances, but you will have to look somewhere for starting pitching, and I think that's an interesting debate to have, is what would you give up for those guys, and would you be willing to? And, it's hard to say because it'd be hard to know exactly. You could get an idea of what the White Sox would want, but knowing exactly what they want, maybe there'd be an extra clause in here or there, if you know what I mean. But, the good thing is that you have this young kid in Kyle Hendricks. He's in his upper 20s, but still has a lot left in the tank, and pitches like a Maddox type deal who, doesn't really use a lot of the crazy motions and limbs and whatnot. So the chances of staying healthier are, in a way, better. So, but you're going to need more in the future. That's definitely for sure. So, we'll see where it goes from there. We'll see how much longer people like John Lester can go, because I still think he's got some good years left in the tank, but he's definitely not young, that's for sure. And there'll be more free agent pitchers coming up in later years, so we'll see what they do with that.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the article you wrote, because that is a burning question about who's going to be the leadoff man. I mean, it was a pretty easy choice the last couple years, but now we don't have that traditional leadoff man. So you want to talk about your article a little bit, because it was a really good article.
Thank you. Yeah, I wrote this article for Cleat Geeks, a really good website. You all should check it out if you get a chance. And basically what I said is that this is a sabermetrically built team. And to sum that all up, if you've seen the movie Moneyball, the key is just to get on base. A lot of people look at the quote-unquote prototypical leadoff guy. Oh, it's a guy who hits for high average, steals bases, is really fast, doesn't hit for a lot of power. And, that's the traditional leadoff guy, but when you're a sabermetrically built team like the Cubs, getting on base is the most important. And it's not just about, getting on base and stealing bases. Stealing bases really aren't part of the Cubs' forte, and it's really not a big part of sabermetrics, really. Smart base running is more important than stealing bases. So guys who could go first to third, guys who are aware and could, tag up in the right situation. I mean, obviously, speed does help, but if you're smart about your base running and your whole philosophy is to just get on base, you will generate runs by getting on base. Don't worry about stealing second. You don't have to steal second. If your team is good at getting on base, you will generate more runs. That's how it typically goes in a sabermetrically built team. And as this team is sabermetrically built, and Joe Madden even says that his stats geeks are the ones that help him with the lineups every day, with matchups and whatnot, the Cubs are full of leadoff options. And I gave 4 options because these are guys who just really at the end of the day are just good at getting on base, and they have a pretty good UBR rating. And for those of you who don't know what UBR is ultimate base running. But on base is really the biggest key. And the Cubs are full of on-base guys. That's how they built their team, sabermetrically, get on base. So the guys I listed were Kyle Schwarber, John Jay, Jason Hayward, and Ben Zobrist. And, there's a lot of talk about Kyle Schwarber being the leadoff guy, and people are thinking, well, he's a slugger and he doesn't run fast. Yes, but he does a really good job of getting on base. And a guy who has a high OPS and can, slug the ball, it's a good way to start in front of Bryant and Rizzo, who are going to be probably your 2-3-3-4 punch right there. They're the cleanup hitters. We know that. So to lead off with that kind of ability to get on base and the kind of power to have, you slug either home runs or doubles or whatnot. It's a good way to start a ball game with a lot of hitters behind you. You also have Ben Zobrist, really good on-base guy, doesn't strike out a lot, has a really good eye at the plate, makes contact a lot. You have John Jay, who's more of your typical leadoff guy. He doesn't hit for power. He's got, speed, pretty smart base runner, and he's got a good on-base percentage. And then you have Jason Hayward, who I said is a real big factor for this team. If he can bring his offense back to what he was, and his average on base before this year was around 350, and that's above average. So he's changing his swing. He's working on everything. If he gets back to that, then he can be a leadoff candidate. And Joe Mann goes crazy about his lineups all the time. So there will be days where maybe John Jay's the leadoff guy if he's playing, and if not, you could have Schwarber or Zobrist or Hayward, or, he goes crazy with these lineups. So there's a lot of options out there, and it's not like losing Fowler means we have no leadoff guy, because that's far from true.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. My one concern with Kyle Schwarber is I love his on-base ability, but if that power comes through, I mean, look at Chris Bryant, is his rookie year. He hit a bunch of home runs, but this year you saw the power really start to come in its own. That's pretty much what happens with young players, is that power doesn't come in until a year or two or three into their big league career, just because they're getting used to major league pitching compared to AA, AAA. And if Schwarber develops 40 home run a year power, you just don't want to lose that many RBIs by not having somebody on in front of him. But then again, how often is your leadoff guy coming up with a clean inning?
Right.
But I like the Jason Hayward one because he's not, other than that little bit of stretch in Atlanta where he was hitting home runs, he's not really a home run guy, but he is an on-base guy, and he's probably, arguably, the smartest base runner that the Cubs have. So he's got a little bit of speed that he could steal bases if you want him to. He's a threat to do it, and if he gets on and you've got other guys, batting in front of him, or behind him with Bryant or Rizzo, he's a really smart base runner, and he's not going to put you at risk, and he knows when to be aggressive, when to be cautious. That's what I like about him. And I've been watching videos, is he really is working hard on his swing to get it back to where it was. And if he can get back to his career averages, let alone getting it back to career averages surrounded by superstars on your team, that we've got a really good leadoff man there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at Jason Hayward and you look at his career UBR numbers, and they're really, really good. As you said, he's a good base runner. So, the combination of on base and good base running, pretty much what I said in that article, is kind of what you're really looking at in a leadoff guy. Not a speedster that just steals bases, not a guy who just, quotes, hits for a high batting average. You got to look at the on base. And I think Jason Hayward personally is going to have a huge, huge comeback year. I'm putting money on it.
Yeah, I am too. I really am confident in that. I think part of it was new city. Part of it was the pressure of that contract, the expectations of this team and the fans. I think it all just got into his head, and he just never was able to get out of that funk. And I really hope, because if you look at his career numbers in April and early May, never been good. I just hope that if he doesn't start in that funk this year, because people are just going to groan and be on him. And I hope that it just doesn't become cyclical and self-fulfilling. I think he's so talented, and I argue tooth and nail against people that are like, bad contract, Cubs should get rid of him. No, he's the best defensive outfielder the Cubs have by far.
Absolutely.
By far and away. And Joe Madden, is one thing he said was during the Cubs convention was, if the Cubs are to repeat, it's going to be because their defense stayed great.
Uh-huh.
And
Yep.
and he brought up the Mariners, the one they'd seen that won 100 and something, 115 games or whatever they won.
116 games in 2001.
Yeah, and they were nowhere near as good the next year, even though they still had most of the same talent. Is their defense was much worse. That was the
Right.
example he brought up.
Kind of
And-
outside Griffey Jr., yeah.
So he wants to maintain this team being a good defensive team. And if you get rid of, I mean, you're just selling at a poor time if you're going to get rid of Hayward at this point. But even if you don't play him, you're defensively much worse.
Yes.
And he makes everybody else around you better. I mean, look at Fowler. Fowler is a average center fielder, statistically average.
Right.
Last year, playing next to Jason Hayward, he played great, and that's because he focused on where he needed to be. He didn't need to cover anything else, and he knew that looking over, he just turned his head, and there was probably the best right fielder in baseball. And it makes it that much easier, is you make everybody around you better by improving your defense. If you have a better first baseman, it makes your shortstop better because he's going to dig things out. It's the same way. So, I think, he's gonna bounce back, but he's an important cog to this team.
Yeah, I mean, think about the speech he made in the weight room. I mean, to regather the team that was in shock and in tears, to bring that back together. I mean, that's something you got to note. And he still won a Gold Glove this year, as we mentioned about the defense. So he has plenty of value. And to say to just get rid of him, it's just silly. And I mean, he's got such a big contract, and you know what? We'll take the big contract expense. We won the World Series. I'm going to bring that up again. We won the World Series. And think about right now. Think about this Cubs team and think about who they have in the field. And think about just the defense that this team has. And you're going to see more Albert Almora Jr., who, look at the defense promise he's shown. Look at what he can do. John Jay, also a good defender. And then look at all your guys with another year of experience, and Wilson Contreras behind the plate who's got a cannon. I mean, defense is such an important part of a team that I don't think other Cub teams had before, a defense at a level like that.
And, sorry, I had myself on mute. And don't forget Kyle Schwarber is still going to catch. So if you, on days when you need, where it's weird wind patterns, or you've got fly ball pitcher, or whatever, and you need a really great defense out there, and you still want Schwarber's bat in there, don't think that they won't put him in at catcher, because they've said as much. And sure, he had those knee issues, but think about how many knee issues Carlton Fisk had, and he played until he was 40 as catcher.
Yeah, he played a long time.
And so, when they need a solid defensive outfield, they're going to go with John Jay, Albert Almora, and Jason Hayward, because Albert Almora is another phenomenal defender. John Jay is a pretty good defender, and we know that Hayward is great. So if they need and they still want his bat in there, they'll put him a catcher. That's what they'll do.
And you could also, you could put Ben Zobrist in left field. You could put Chris Bryant in the outfield. I mean, this team is so fun because of Joe Madden's love for the platoon / not really as much the platoon as it was, where it was, oh, you play one day, you play the other, but you could play in one place, you play the other. The utility platoon. The utility platoon is what really makes this team special, is because, okay, for this matchup, you're going to play here. But for these matchups, you're going to play here. So it's not like your traditional platoon where it's like, oh, you just play these days and you won't play these days. You just play these days and you won't play these days. It's you're going to be here or here when you're facing this or this. And you got a number of guys who could play both outfield and infield and in different spots in the infield. So the utility man is such a great thing to have. You can never have enough of it.
Oh, absolutely not. So we've talked a lot about the Cubs. Let's switch over to the Bulls a little bit. They have had an interesting week, to say the least.
Yeah.
I mean, first off, I want to say is I don't care how talented he is. This week just emphasized I'm so glad we don't have Derrick Rose anymore.
Yeah, that whole thing. I mean, look, I mean, I get stuff comes up. I get something personal happens. I get there's an emergency. But you can't just not tell your employer where you are.
It's a 2-hour flight back from New York to Chicago, and however long to get to the airport and wait in the security line and get on your plane. I'm sure you took a private plane, but whatever. There's still that time of boarding. You could send a text message. You could make a phone call. You could just let somebody know if something happened. There's absolutely no way the Knicks, especially being run by Phil Jackson, who's all touchy-feely, is going to be like, no. Just let them know. They were genuinely worried that something happened to him. They sent somebody to his apartment to go find him.
Right. That's the thing. He said he didn't want to be a distraction, but it's more distracting if people don't know if you're alive or okay or not. And you know what? Even if, the Knicks said, I don't really like it. We'll talk about this later. They know you're okay. They know what's going on. No matter how they react, they know. The whole issue is they had no idea where he was, if he was okay, what he was doing. That was the problem.
Yeah, and they're mad now because he's okay. And it's like a parent situation. If your kid is out till the wee hours and you are freaked out because you don't know everything, the worst thing's always going through your mind. But
Right.
if they texted you, hey, listen, something came up, I'm going to be really late, then you could just be like, all right, get home as soon as you can, take care of whatever you have to take care of, get home, you need me to come get you, you're not as mad. You're like, okay, you were responsible enough to let me know what's going on. But Derrick Rose is just Derrick Rose. And even when they asked Joakim Noah, who's like his best friend, about where he was, he didn't have an answer. He just didn't have an answer. And Taj afterwards, after that game, was just like, he's a really good guy. He's misunderstood. But the thing with me and Derrick is, after all of this, Derrick fully thinks he's going to get a max contract this offseason.
Yeah.
He fully thinks that. He even said as much. He's like, oh, this situation's not going to affect anybody giving me a max contract. Are you on, he's right. This one incident is not going to affect it. But all of it together, the whole debacle with the Bulls trying to support him and him getting medically cleared and just deciding not to play, all of the knee injuries, the headaches he's been, his brother, the disappearing acts, the saving himself, the publicity gaffes, the fact that he doesn't recruit other players, the fact that he's not going to be at the face of your franchise. What idiot team is going to give him that money? What idiot team?
Yeah, right, exactly. And plus, he's not having a bad year with the Knicks, but he's not putting up the MVP superstar numbers he had in 2011. I mean, to even just deem the court play worthy, but there's a lot more to that. Like you said, I mean, you pretty much listed everything. And, I know Derrick isn't, he's not like an evil person that goes out to do bad things to hurt people. I don't want to sound mean by saying this. I just don't think he's a very smart guy. I think he's gotten a lot of bad advice. He doesn't know how to carry himself in many situations. And, he's kind of dug himself a couple holes with the way you act here. But this is a situation where letting your employer know where you are it's common sense. Like, how can you not, think to tell your employer? I mean, I'm so. Could you imagine if we had to deal with that here in Chicago? I mean, the New York media is, it's probably the most ruthless media in sports, but, with other stuff that's already happened here with him in Chicago, just another thing to add on top of that if he were a Bull, just imagine what could have happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the very, very, very least is text your best friend Joakim Noah, who's on your team, and let him make the call. I've had situations in my life where really bad things happen, and I've turned to friends and loved ones to be like, hey, can you take care of this important thing for me because I'm not able to? And that they go, hey, that's what I'm here for. And they do it, and vice versa.
Right.
You don't think Joakim Noah is capable of calling the coach and being like, hey, I just talked to Derek, family emergency. He's got to go back to Chicago. And then that's it. They don't, you don't have to answer any questions because you didn't tell Joe. And Joe is willing to be like, is everything okay? Yes. I don't want to talk about it. Okay. As long as you're okay. Yeah, I'm fine. And then when they go to ask questions about it, Joe goes, I don't know. And there's nobody to ask, and you don't have to answer those questions. But he didn't even do that. And I guess for me, the biggest thing is he has had a nice season in New York, and they're a complete. It's not the talent on that team that's making that team bad. It's just their poor on-court chemistry is.
Right.
That team should be built around Porzingis, and it's not. It's Derek who needs the ball. It's Carmelo that needs the ball, and there's not enough balls to get around, and Porzingis is the guy that should be getting the ball and is not getting the ball. And he's been out with some illness and injury, but the fact for me is, if I'm paying somebody max contract money, they better do one of two things, preferably both. One is get me that closer to the title than I am currently. And it shouldn't be more than incrementally. It should be a significant closer. Like adding a Russell Westbrook makes your team better no matter who you are. Does Derrick Rose make your team better? Look at the Knicks. They're not better. And two, is he going to put butts in the seats? And he doesn't do that anymore. People aren't like clamoring like, oh, I'm like, Kevin Durant is a personable guy. People like him. He can do commercials. He can smile for the camera, and he can, like, Derek is not that guy. And you don't have to be that guy, but if I'm signing this big check, why do I want a guy who's not going to fill the things I need him to do for that kind of money?
Yeah, Derrick Rose, obviously, a few years ago, he was one of the faces of the NBA, when he was MVP and whatnot. And, it's unfortunate because back then, I mean, Rose was almost like a messiah-like figure here in Chicago. He was going to bring the first title since the Jordan era back. He was going to do a lot, in the eyes of some of the kids that grew up in bad neighborhoods like he did. It's really unfortunate to see this happen, but that's kind of what it's fallen to. And a max contract for him right now, it's just not realistic. And yes, he's played nicely with the Knicks, but like you said, the Knicks should be building around Porzingis and building a much younger core around him, because let's face it, Joakim Noah, kind of like Rose, has battled so many injuries and was a really good player, but he's definitely past his most usefulness. So, it's hard to see a great figure fall so low, but at the same time, we don't want to be dealing with that anymore, unfortunately. When things went bad, it wasn't fun to deal with.
So, yeah, I don't really want to break down these games from this week because they were pretty depressing.
Yes,
but
they were.
I think the few takeaway points for me, and I want to hear your takeaway points as well, is the Bulls are not a good team. The Bulls are Jimmy Butler with a bunch of role players. And Dwayne Wade can be good in spurts, but not a whole game, and he can't play back-to-back games, which is why he's not playing today. And playing against the Oklahoma City Thunder, who losing Durant made them absolutely not a championship contender anymore, but still a very good team. You saw how Russell Westbrook is able to carry a team, and the fact with Jimmy being, well, the flu running rampant through the Bulls organization this week, so many guys sick, not being able to play, is you saw the effect on this team, and they were forced to play Rajon Rondo. But the one positive thing is that Rajon Rondo knows his role on this team. It's running the seconds.
Right. I mean, Rondo, he's done some good things player-wise, but, kind of how I sum it up is despite, playing some solid basketball, I wish, A, he could score a little bit more, and B, kind of wish he wasn't here at all because of just there's so much drama and so much crap to deal with him, and we all saw that right away. And now you have the benchings and the suspensions like we've talked about earlier, and to me it's just not really worth having him because this team's not contending anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me the most frustrating thing is there was a 2-game span. I want to say it was the Knicks and the Wizards game, where you had the combination of Michael Carter-Williams, Bobby Portis, and Doug McDermott, who should be important players on your team. They played a combined 51 minutes in 2 games and had a combined 7 points.
Yeah.
That's bad productivity.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
And in the Wizards is at least you saw life out of Denzel Valentine, but you saw how much better John Wall is, and B, you saw a huge gaping hole problem with the Bulls is they can't stop. They have no defensive point guard that can stop somebody like a John Wall.
Yeah, and plus, I say this over and over, they lack that athleticism that many other teams have. And that's why you see lower, not so good teams like lottery pick type teams like the Timberwolves who have young athletic guys, and people like the Greek Freak who is as athletic of a basketball player as you can think of, just absolutely dominate the Bulls. And, there was an article published in the Tribune, I believe it was this morning, and it was called Chicago Bulls Stuck in the Middle. And it's what we've been talking about the whole time. They are the definition of basketball hell. They can't compete with a lot of these athletic guys, but they're not going to be so bad that they're going to have a lottery pick or anything. So you ask yourself over and over, what's the future for this team? Because I just don't see one. And weeks like what we saw with the Bulls this week, it's going to be a common theme. You're going to win a few games, and then you're going to lose some really, really bad ones. I mean, that game against the Wizards that they lost, I mean, that was, they had a lead, and then it evaporated, and it was gone, and, it was just bad. And it's just the same movie over and over where it's almost like the Bulls take one step forward, then 2 steps back. Then...
That's
2 steps
right
forward,
there.
And another 2 steps back.
Yeah, it's that game against the Wizards. Although they lost, you're like, okay, I'm watching this and I have some positivity here because there's no Jimmy, no Dwayne Wade, no Nico, and you've got Rondo who's just coming off of a debacle there. And I don't even want to get into that whole drama.
It could go on and on about that.
Yeah, we'd be talking for 6 hours about that. But that's just absolute drama, and he's his first time playing again because they needed bodies. They wouldn't have played him if they didn't need to, and they played tough against the Wizards and almost pulled out that victory. Should have pulled out that victory. And you're like, all right, well, I can see these, because going into the game, you're like, oh God, who is going to score? Who's going to be the leading scorer? And to see McDermott and Denzel Valentine step up and some guys step up, you're like, oh, wow, maybe this is what they needed, is to be forced to carry the burden on their shoulders. So when Nico, Jimmy, and Dwayne Wade come back, that they're going to play better. And nope, they play the Knicks and poop the bed.
Yeah, very, very badly.
Yeah, so I was discussing with my buddy Gary, who's a season ticket holder for the Bulls, and he's like, just think about how long the Knicks have been trying to build a contender afterwards. He's like, these things take time if you don't draft like a LeBron James or a Kevin Durant. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, look at the 76ers, as they've gotten like how many top draft picks and they're still terrible. And he's like, so just enjoy the game and be happy. And I was like, I'm like, it's one thing to just enjoy the game when the front office is trying to compete to win. I don't feel that way with the Bulls. I just feel I don't feel like they have a plan. The 76ers is like their debacle. But they've got so much talent and like young talent that it's at least fun to watch, even though they're not good. They do some special things sometimes. You see these glimpses where you don't see with the Bulls, and yeah. One day those kids could wake up and be like, all right, we figured out how to play together, and suddenly you have a darn good team. The Bulls, who's going to wake up? Dwayne Wade can't. He's on borrowed time right now. Rondo should not be on this team. He might not. This might be his last stop in the NBA because of attitude. He might have to go play in like Greece or something. So it's so much, just so much drama in this team that it makes it much less fun to watch than it should be.
Honestly, other than Jimmy Butler, I really don't enjoy watching the Bulls. I have had as much little investment as I've ever had in them, ever. Even like the baby Bulls, when they weren't really as good in the mid 2000s, but were showing like some signs of progress, like, oh, Kirk Heinrich, Ben Gordon. I enjoyed watching that. I still watch, but right now, I just lack the motivation right now to watch them, because I don't think they're very fun to watch outside Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is a treat to watch. He's really good, but other than that, your other star player is a guy who doesn't play every day because he's old. I mean, for goodness sake, you expect to go anywhere with that? With one great superstar, one superstar who's old that still is good, but he's old, a guy who was once good but has attitude problems and shouldn't be there, and the rest inconsistent role players and questionable coaching. It's just I have no reason to be genuinely interested in this team outside Jimmy Butler.
The one positive thing I can think of is that right now Sacramento is sitting at the 11th seed. So if they can hold this position, then the Bulls will get their number 1 draft pick. So that's something. It's a top 10 protected. So as long as they finish outside the top 10, the Bulls get their number 1 pick, and they're at number 11 right now. So I'm like, please, Sacramento, and like I'm at the point where when the Bulls have to play Sacramento, I'm just gonna be like, please, Bulls, please lose, give them a couple more
for the
wins.
future.
Yeah, because that's how they're gonna have to do it. Is they're gonna have to take 2 bites at the apple with their pick and Sacramento's pick to try to get somebody that's going to be a good player, or at least a role player that's a decent role player.
I just hope they have a plan, at least an idea of what they want. That's what I'm really hoping. Can I trust this front office to do the right thing? If you get a good draft pick from the Sacramento Kings and another one in the first round, can I trust this team to draft the right player and draft them, and develop them? That's what I always ask myself.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But that's another story is what they can do with the talent, and who knows if they're even going to be there come draft day.
Right.
So let's talk about the Blackhawks a little bit. Is they've since we last recorded, they were in the midst of the game against the Predators while we were recording, and they had one completed game, and then they're in a game right now since. I went back.
This is a very frustrating game right now.
Yeah, I just looked at the score. So the Predators game, it was funny because I was just seeing scores while we were recording, and I was like, all right, the Blackhawks are up. Oh, it's tied. Oh, they just won 5-2. Like, how did that happen?
Bunch of empty netters.
Yeah, and I went back and I watched the game because I pretty much a lot of times have to DVR games and watch them later because I've got a 2-year-old that I need to put to bed. So I watch them after she goes to bed. And I'm watching this game and I'm like, why is this game so close with the Predators? The Predators shouldn't be this good and they shouldn't be hanging around. And it's not like I don't think the Blackhawks played terribly. It was just some boneheaded things that kept the Predators in the game. There was some nice saves that they made at goal. And it was tied all the way through halfway through the third period. And it was 3-2 with 2 minutes left. You're like, this is too much of a nail biter.
Right. And right now they just flashed a graphic on the screen that Patrick Kane has just set his career high mark for shots on goal. He's got the 2 goals tonight for the Hawks, and they had a 2-0 lead in this game and then lost it. And they had full control of this game. They could have put it away. Devin Dubnyk made some saves in the game, and then next thing you know, they're taking the lead. And one thing I like to point out is the defensive pairing on for most of these goals that they said, Roosevelt and Van Riemsdyk. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, Roosevelt shouldn't be out there. You've got 8 defensemen. Roosevelt should not be out there.
He shouldn't be on the team, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine when you have a shortage of defensemen and you're like, you know what, I trust him. He knows the system. I'm not going to bring in some rando that has to learn how we play. I get that. But you've got 8 defensemen, including him. So somebody's got to sit anyway. Now it's 2 people. So why is Roosevelt still on this team?
Q loves him for some reason. I don't understand it. I mean, I thought he was done a few years ago when he broke his leg in the playoffs, but they just kind of keep dragging him back.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because he's not very good, and
he's old and slow.
Q keeps talking about, well, it's hard to find minutes for these guys. Well, then get rid of one of them.
Right, just get rid of Roosevelt.
Yeah, and they were like, well, we sent Forsling down because he has options to go to Rockford. Well, you could just cut Roosevelt and nobody's going to re-sign him. That's the ultimate option.
Right.
Get rid of him. Nobody else is picking him up. He'll just be sitting at home. Be like, you know what? We're going to cut you, and if we need you later in the season because of injuries, we'll bring you back. Okay, that's fine. He's rich. He's making money. Whatever. So frustrating. But against the Predators, you had a goal that was given up because of a broken stick by Anisimov, and that's frustrating because it's a turnover in their offensive in their own zone. You're like, most of the time it's a turnover when those situations happen, but this was just a fluke thing. The stick shatters trying to pass it, and the other one was a bad change. And the Blackhawks, how do you have one of the best coaches of all time, veteran team, and you have so many problems with changes? I was reading an article from, was it last year, where a Predators beat writer was like, is it me or is this Blackhawks team have too many men on the ice penalties that more than I've ever seen. This team they can't make changes. And it's not just like, oh, it's this guy. they're all like they're lazy changes, and so many times they give up these odd man rushes and give up goals because they've had bad changes. And so the one goal against the Predators was a bad change, and the other one was a turnover because of a shattered stick. And those are the types of things that are the difference between winning and losing.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's hockey. Stuff like that happens. But, you mentioned the changes. I think one of my theories is that there are a lot of rookies on this team, so that may contribute. But still, you would think they would kind of have that down by now. But you're definitely right. It definitely seems like too many men on the ice is a common penalty that they like to take.
Yeah, and so that was a tough. I mean, they won, and the score looked nice, a 5-2 win. But realistically, it was a close game.
It was a one-goal game for a lot of it.
Yeah, and even though I think the Blackhawks were they were much superior team via numbers, via the eyeball test, but the score didn't reflect that, and it doesn't always in hockey.
Yeah, and we're getting down to 2.5 minutes in this game against the Wild, down 1, and I wanted to point out that the Hawks have not beaten the Wild since they swept them in the playoffs in 2015.
Oh, that's tough to hear.
Yeah, and we're probably going to lose to them again if they don't tie this up.
Yeah,
I mean, if we don't win this game, we're out of first place. The Wild have taken over first place, and God, this was a game you felt like the Hawks were going to win. And watching the first period or so, and period and a half, I should say, the Hawks, they were going to win this game. It looked like they were going to easily take this one, and then they coughed it up. So, kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and I only saw bits and pieces of the game against the Capitals just because it was another one where I recorded and I knew the score, and I started the recording late because I thought it started later than it did, and so it was already 3-0 when I started, and I was like, I saw the highlights online, and I was like, they're getting dominated in every sense of physically. The Capitals didn't give them space to do anything. They were the more aggressive team, the more physical team, and they had more shots on goal. It was just a as bad of a game as the Blackhawks could have played.
Oh, I mean, that game in Washington, that was they said about that game, it was like Chris Kamka on Twitter tweeted that it was the last time they lost by 6 and not scoring a goal since like 2006. So it was a historically bad loss for that Taze and Kane team.
Yeah, it was not a good game, and I felt that it was a rough time to have. And I mentioned this last week's show. I said, the Hawks got a few wins. They strung together because of they were playing some powder puff teams. And I was like, this is not going to continue. They've got some tough games coming up. They've got the Capitals and they've got the Wild. And lo and behold, is they get just trounced by the Capitals, and it's looking closer and closer like it's going to be a loss to the Wild. And they really, I felt that had they been able to at least get a point out of that Washington game, going to overtime and losing, or getting a win, that whatever happened with the Wild was not that big of a deal. But the way that happened and the timing of that happening is I felt that this Wild game was so much more important to the Blackhawks than it was to the Wild, and they're just not coming out and showing what they need to show.
Right now, in the last minute here, the Hawks are missing their passes by like 10 feet. Like, I don't know if you're watching right now, but I have the TV on mute in the background, and they look as lost as they could be for a game that they dominated a lot of, and they dominated a lot of this game, and now they just look as lost as they could possibly be. It just, this is frustrating. This really is. And, I say it over and over. It doesn't matter where the Hawks make the playoffs as long as they make the playoffs, but these are games you really do want to win.
Yeah, and I saw a tweet from a website called moneypuck.com, and they released their probabilities, because we're right around the halfway point in the season. We're a little bit just past the halfway point in the season, and they released their probabilities of teams making the playoffs, and they had the Blackhawks as only like an 80-something% chance of making the playoffs. And the reason I found this is Mark Lazarus retweeted that something like, "Oh, they don't have much faith in the Hawks," and I kind of tweeted back to Mark Lazarus, but just kept the money puck on there, and I was like, this is a little bit ridiculous. And Money Puck started tweeting me like, they're an injury concern, that they're below average on Corsi and expected goals, which is indicative of future struggles. And honestly, I just stopped because they do have some points. Is this team doesn't get enough shots on goal. They've got a lot of playmakers, but they don't consistently set their offense. It's a lot of one-timers and then back on defense.
Well, the Hawks, they just lost a really frustrating game. And you were talking about the shots on goal when they try to pass up on shooting to try to make an extra pass. And, little things like that, they get frustrating, especially on a power play. And, like I said before, it doesn't have that same possession skill that they had in the past. It's different, than this Hawks team was before, when it was a lot of puck possession the Hawks had. The Hawks dominated in puck possession and passing and shots on goal, and you're just not seeing that as much now. And, a lot of it's the young guys. There's been inconsistencies with injuries, so, we'll see how they play down the stretch, because this is always that kind of time of the year when the Hawks look really bad. They have some really bad games, and the dog days of the midseason usually hit them pretty hard. But it all matters in the playoffs. But we'll see what kind of adjustments they can make, because there are times, even though the Hawks are winning games, you say, wow, they were really lucky to win that game.
Yeah, it really is true. And you watch, and good things happen when they put guys in front of the net. Is look at the Predators game. Is the Richard Panik had the opportunity in front where he had that between the legs shot, and Ryan Hartman comes in there and crashes in, and they get a goal. It was a fluky goal, but those are the things that happen. Is when there's chaos in front of the goal, good things happen. When the goalie loses the puck for a second, it's really hard to stop shots when you can't see it. Is when it pops up at you last second. The good things happen. Those are the types of things they don't have. They slap shot here. It's just a lot of one and done instead of trying to shoot rebounds and deflections off of the goalie and trying to get those in. You're just not seeing those, and it's a little bit frustrating. And I know this team is playing good defense, but you can't circle the wagons for a whole season and into the playoffs and expect good things to happen by doing that. That's something you do when you're recovering from a key player being injured, or your goaltending is being a little bit suspect. Things like that is when you're actually a championship caliber team, is you go out there and you be aggressive.
Right, and you saw a lot of these wins that the Hawks had, and you count them many times. How many amazing saves saved the game, pun intended, actually saved the game from a loss? And there's a lot of them. And, you've seen some of those comeback wins the Hawks have had, and their record, they're not in first place anymore. The Wild have taken over first place, but there were times in the season where you come out with a win and you're saying, wow, how did we win? Or how did we at least get a point out of that? I mean, sometimes I don't think the record shows the struggles the Hawks have had this year. And I don't want to sound like such a negative person, because it's not like the Hawks are a bad team, but they are just not the same, and they have some issues in certain areas.
Absolutely. And I guess the last couple topics I just want to bring up with the Blackhawks is Hinostroza seems to be fitting in well with that top line. And I think the Blackhawks tentatively may have found the guy that they want to be on the line with, on the Taves line. And the other one is Nick Schmaltz, back up from Rockford.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's been a lot of carouseling between Rockford and the Hawks. A lot of call-ups and send-downs and whatnot. But for the love of God, no more Roosevelt. For goodness sake, no more Roosevelt. I can't say that enough. I'm so sick of Micah Roosevelt. He gets bulldozed over. He gets outskated almost every time. I'm not insulting his skills, but he is old. He cannot move anymore. His time with us should be done. You know, when he first came to the Hawks, he was already pretty old, and he had a solid career, but, you know, he is just way, way overdue to be moved on from completely. I've had enough of Roosevelt.
Yeah, the mantra should be no more Roosevelt, and Nick Schmaltz, shoot the puck.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So I guess the last thing I want to talk about is the national championship game happened in college football with Clemson winning against Alabama, and basically, as expected, the casual fans all came out and said the Bears need to draft Deshaun Watson, number 3. And I don't know your thoughts about it, but I don't rank him anywhere near number 3 right now, and I don't think anybody else that does this for a living does.
Right, no, I haven't heard anyone say that either. And, you know, there's no doubt that the kid is, you know, a talented football player. He's got a great attitude. He works very hard. He's a very likable person. But 3rd overall, yeah, I think there's just too many red flags. Because, you know, he does great at the college level. And, you know, we'll see what happens if he makes it to the NFL at some point. But 3rd overall?
Yeah, here's a list of
in the
quarterbacks
NFL.
that did great in college football that people clamored over to take early and didn't work out so well. Jamarcus Russell, Vince Young.
Oh, that was a disaster.
Vince Young, Tim Tebow.
We all know that story.
Yeah, Ryan Leaf, Robert Griffin III. I mean, there's a lot of them, and when you draft bad at quarterback, you lose your job. And yeah, this shouldn't. I mean, I know you need a quarterback, but there's other options to be a bridge. And like, I'm just gonna quickly read. I pulled CBS Sports. They rank Deshaun Watson as the 13th best prospect in the country. Not the number. They rank him as the 2nd best quarterback and the 13th overall prospect. Draft Tech has him as the 9th best prospect and the 2nd best quarterback. Let's see who else. Pro Football Focus, who I really like their stats based one. They have Deshaun Watson as the 14th best prospect in college, or going to be in the draft. Walter Football, they don't even have him in the top 43. Mel Kiper has him as the 3rd best quarterback, and not anywhere near the top 10 is overall in picks. Fox Sports has him as the 33rd best prospect. So that's the frustrating thing, is if the casual fan is going to complain that we didn't get a quarterback when there are some really good defensive players that are going to be sitting at that number 3 spot.
Like we say, you know, we want that stud safety that we haven't had in years. You know, there's an opportunity to get one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, best case scenario is that Cleveland freaks out and drafts a quarterback, and 49ers do the same thing. So then we can go get Myles Garrett, the edge rusher from Texas A&M, because he's special. He's basically number 1 on everybody's board. And he's special. You get him and you pair him on the other side of Leonard Floyd, and that's how you neutralize Aaron Rodgers. But overall, I mean, there's still Jonathan Allen, who is another defensive end who's a beast. You've got Malik Hooker, the free safety from Ohio State. And I know safeties don't go that high, but if you were to get a safety of his caliber and then spend a little money in free agency and bring in like an Eric Berry, suddenly you went from just an abysmal safety rotation to a really darn good one.
Yeah, I mean, we have not had that huge, great playmaking safety in a long time. And we've seen, once again, I use the word carousel, just different safeties that, let's face it, haven't been very good at all. But, here's a great opportunity to rebuild a secondary you absolutely need to rebuild. And yes, you need a quarterback for the future. And yes, you could get that at a later time. But think about how important it is in a passing game today in the NFL to have a good secondary.
Absolutely. And this, if the Bears follow through with what the philosophy was when Ryan Pace accepted this job in every press conference he's ever given, and the way that they actually handled their draft so far is they're going to trust their draft board and draft best player available. And unless something really changes between now and the draft date in April, is I don't see any of the quarterbacks being worth the number 3 pick. If one starts to be a buzz and people are trying to, they shoot up the boards, and like quarterbacks do as people go reaching for them, then the Bears should be opportunistic and trade back a couple spots and pick up later picks and still get their guy. But there's too much talent in this draft and none of it's at quarterback.
Right. You wish so badly they could go back in time and somehow get Aaron Rodgers and have him right now on the Bears, because what he's doing is unbelievable. And it's so frustrating as a Bears fan that I have to put up with this garbage year after year while he's pulling out some sort of pixie dust every time he plays. I mean, it's unbelievable. And, even though you don't have that, you got to focus on everything. And by that, he means you got to go offense and defense. And right now, you have an opportunity to do both, really. So you got to be really, really smart about this. And you got to develop correctly, and you got to make sure that they could at least stay healthy, because all those guys on IR last year for the Bears, I mean, it was an astounding number.
Yeah, and if you're the Bears and you do this smart, you could have a situation where you trade back a few spots, let somebody go up there and draft Trubisky or Deshaun Kaiser or somebody. Then you take the picks that you got, couple them with your second round, move back into the first round, and you get a guy you wanted anyway with your first pick. And then later in the first round, you get, one of those late first round type quarterbacks, whether that be Deshaun Watson or whether that be Luke Falk or Brad Kaya, and you still get your quarterback, but you get the defender that you wanted as well.
Right. Exactly. I mean, this draft is going to be really, really interesting. And honestly, it's kind of sad to say, but the draft has been the most impressive, not impressive, that's not the word I'm looking for, most interesting and most looked at aspect about the Bears, because, I mean, they haven't been contenders and they haven't been a really interesting team, but seeing who they get for the future has been the most interesting. Last year they had all those picks and they made some signings, and they're going to do more picking this year with a lot on the line, a lot they have to do. They want to make the right picks. They want to go in the right direction. So, that's honestly probably the most I've been hearing about the Bears is not their play itself this year, because it's been so bad. It's been who they're going to draft. And when draft day comes, I think the Bears will be talked about more that day than they have been, all year, basically. It sounds crazy, but, when you think about it, when people talk a lot about the Bears, it has a lot to do with draft picks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with that is every year on the show is leading up to the NFL draft, is every week we focus on one position and highlight several guys that, maybe they might be top guys or interesting guys or guys that at that position where the fans want to hear about. And I go through and I watch game film. Like, I actually watch every single play that they're in an entire game, just back-to-back clip of them in plays for several games, sometimes 4, 5, 6 games in the season, and really give my draft perspective. And that to get done before the draft is we're going to end up starting next week, and I think we're going to start with the running backs. So if you have any running backs that you want to take a look at or you want me to take a look at, let me know. And fans, if you have running backs or any player in the draft that you want me to focus on, let me know, and I'll make sure I take a look. We already had one listener that sent a message saying, I know drafting is coming up. Can you look at Joe Mixon, the running back out of Oklahoma? So I'll make sure I watch him as well.
Yeah, I got to do my research too. I got to look at kind of who the updated, top look-ats are, because, throughout the college season, you hear about guys and it always fluctuates. But, this is the time to really, really start focusing on that, especially since it's the off season of your team and you're really sick and tired of watching your rival team be so magical every year. But I know I keep going on about that. So
yeah, and
it's just really frustrating.
Yeah, and it's funny because I love college football, and I just watch whatever game is on. It could be random teams that I don't care about, but I love college football. And it's funny because when I watch it as just a fan, I'm just watching the game, I'll notice if somebody's good, and I know the names of the top players, but it's when it comes down to when I start watching the film, I like hyper focus on, all right, what are they doing on this play? If it's a running back and it's a obvious passing down, how is their pass protection? How is their route running? Even if they don't catch it and they go out for a route, how is the route running? You watch it so much differently when you're just focusing on everything that player does. Wide receivers on running plays, what are they doing? How's their blocking? Things like that. And it's funny because when you start watching as not as a fan, but really focusing on the player, how many things stick out like sore thumbs that I never saw just as watching the game. I'll watch game film from a game I watched live, and I'm like, I missed that.
Oh, it's so easy to miss it in live real time because when you think about it, everything's happening pretty fast. But if you look at it from different angles at different speeds, it's so easy to catch something that you didn't notice.
Yeah, especially defensive backs, because if they're not being thrown at, then you don't really know. But when you go watch the game film, you're like, oh man, that guy's back pedal is terrible. Like it's guys that you watch and you're, I'm trying to think. The year Kyle Fuller was drafted, was it the guy the Browns picked at cornerback? Everybody was touting him, how good he was, and I was watching the game film. I'm like, what am I missing here? I went back and I watched and I was like, he's fast, but his hips are so tight. He turns and runs right away, which makes him susceptible to double moves. And I'm like, I don't see it, and he's been a bust. So I'm like, that makes me feel better that I wasn't the crazy one. But you just see these things as then it's not names that are just thrown out of a hat or that Mel Kiper or Mike Mayock tell you about. It's you're seeing these things and you're like, I don't like that. And you sort of see what's going to translate well into the NFL.
Yep. And as we get closer and closer and closer to the draft, another thing that I always am interested in hearing about is, sometimes you'll hear scouts or people around the NFL or college football reporters, beat writers, whatnot. They'll bring up a little news factoid or something about a certain player that maybe you didn't know about before. Not necessarily a statistic, but they could say, oh, this person's battling this kind of injury, or it's been bothering them, and sometimes that can really change things. So it's always another thing that's interesting to keep an eye out for.
Or they have an imaginary girlfriend.
Oh, Manti Te'o. Man, that's a blast from the past. He's still playing, right, in the NFL?
Yeah, he's not bad. He's
no,
not bad.
You just never hear about him ever.
No, it doesn't help that he's on a West Coast team that's not making the playoffs, but he's actually pretty decent. He was kind of a steal for how late he was picked.
Absolutely. Speaking of West Coast teams, can I just say the whole Chargers thing just looks so bad. The whole thing just looks so bad to me.
I don't know if you saw how other sports teams making fun of the Los Angeles Chargers on Twitter.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
Is when the Dallas Stars just took the Dallas Cowboys logo and made it green, and they were like, "Is this how you do it?" And the Monterey Biscuits minor league baseball team just put the little, thunderbolt on, or the lightning bolt on the biscuit, and was like, "We didn't want to be late to the party." I was like,
well,
wow.
Yeah, and when I first looked at their first logo, the blue and white one, I said, it's the Tampa Bay Lightning and the LA Dodgers just mixed together. And then the Tampa Bay Lightning with this genius tweet says, hey, the Dodgers and I are just friends. And when I saw that, I'm like, that tweet, early on wins 2017. I mean, that was incredible. And if you haven't seen that on Twitter, just go to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Just look up Tampa Bay Lightning, LA Dodgers, and you should find it right away. I mean, the last time I saw it, it had 80,000 retweets. It was really funny.
Yeah, and it's amazing because that should have been a big thing. Is the number 2 market in America, and they're getting a second team, and they haven't had a this is the first year they've had a team since 94, and it was such a debacle between how they let the fans know and changing their logo 3 times in 2 days.
Right. And they're doing simple things like, oh, let's go on paint. Oh, here's the bucket tool. Change the color. There we go.
But I think that's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. I think Alex and I have put together a nice little show. If I do say so myself.
Yeah, I think so too. Before we sign off, I forgot to bring up one fan question I got recently, and it's Hawks related. It's simply kind of on the idea of drafting, and maybe we could talk a little bit about this week and then bring it up again next week to really go into detail. So
Absolutely.
Think about who will the Hawks protect in the upcoming expansion draft for the Los Angeles Knights, because there's a lot of guys on that team that could be targeted outside. I mean, obviously, I think we know the ones that are going to not be touched are Taze, Kane, Seabrook, Keith, Crawford. I mean, those guys, and Hossa, those guys aren't, I don't think those guys are going to be drafted. But, everyone else, people like Darling, Kruger, Hartman, Hinestroza, I think there could be a lot of interest from an expansion team with those guys.
Oh, absolutely. And, I would like to talk a little bit more about that next week, because I really want to sit down and I know the basic rules of how it works, but I really need to sit down and look at the fine points and
research.
And research and see what the salary cap numbers are. Because the Blackhawks are going to try to use this as an advantage to how to get rid of somebody without having to, trade them.
We'll have a great convo about that next week.
Absolutely. So thank you guys so much for listening. Please make sure that however you listen to podcasts, whether iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube, you are hitting subscribe. Follow us on Twitter. Alex is ShyFanPat1, and the show is Swerski at Swerski Sports. The website is swerskisports.com or facebook.com/Swerski Sports. Thank you guys so much for listening, and until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her, you can have her, she's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van, and she looks like...
Remember, New Yorkers, smoking crack is not legal on planes.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears. Oh, when the Bears go bearing down